Ethan Clark was a man whose name people often saw in magazines and business newspapers. To the world, he was the perfect example of success, a man who had climbed from nothing to the top of the corporate ladder. He wore tailored suits, attended big meetings, and made decisions that affected entire industries. He was respected, admired, and sometimes even envied. But behind the shining lights of his public image, Ethan carried a quiet struggle that very few people ever saw. That struggle had nothing to do with money, reputation, or business. It was about being a father to his little girl, Lily. Lily was only 10 years old, yet she had already faced more challenges than most children her age. She had once been a lively, playful child who loved running around the garden, chasing butterflies, and laughing with a joy so bright that it warmed everyone's heart. But after an accident 2 years earlier, her life had changed completely. She could no longer walk or run. She now used a wheelchair, and while her smile was still the same, her world had grown quieter. The friends who used to play tag with her now didn't know what to say. Some children stared, others avoided her, and though no one ever meant harm, their absence left Lily feeling alone. For Ethan, watching his daughter go through that pain was harder than any loss he had ever faced in business. He could negotiate million-dollar deals, but he couldn't negotiate happiness for his daughter. He could sign contracts with a stroke of his pen, but he couldn't sign away her loneliness. The only thing he wanted was to see her laugh freely again, the way she used to before everything changed. When her 10th birthday was approaching, Ethan decided to do something special. He wanted to make the day shine for her, to remind her that she was loved and celebrated. He booked a lovely restaurant with colorful balloons, bright decorations, and a cake that was almost as tall as Lily herself. He invited her classmates, neighbors, and family friends, hoping the room would be filled with laughter, chatter, and the sound of children playing together. On the day of the party, the restaurant looked magical. There were streamers in pink and gold, the tables were set with little gift bags, and the giant cake stood proudly in the center. Ethan dressed in a simple but elegant suit, while Lily wore a beautiful blue dress that matched her sparkling eyes. He fixed her hair with a little bow and gently wheeled her to the decorated table. As he looked at her, he thought, "This is her day. She deserves every bit of happiness." The guests started arriving one by one. Some children ran around excitedly, playing near the balloons, while their parents chatted politely in the background. Music played softly, and waiters carried trays of juice and snacks. From the outside, it looked like a perfect birthday party. But when Ethan looked closer, he noticed something that broke his heart. Lily sat at the head of the table, her hands folded neatly in her lap, her smile polite but quiet. The children who came in glanced at her but didn't sit near her. They played with each other, whispered among themselves, and filled the room with energy, but not one of them came to Lily's side. She looked at them with hopeful eyes at first, waiting for someone to join her, but as time passed, her shoulders slumped slightly. She lowered her gaze to the cake in front of her, pretending to admire its colorful frosting, though inside she felt the weight of being different. Ethan stood nearby, watching. He tried to keep his expression calm, but his heart ached deeply. This was supposed to be her day, yet here she was, sitting alone in the middle of her own birthday party. All his efforts, all the decorations, and all the planning couldn't create the one thing he wanted most: friends who would sit with her, laugh with her, and treat her like she was just another 10-year-old girl. He walked over to her, bent down, and whispered, "Happy birthday, my princess." Lily looked up at him with a small smile, but there was a sadness in her eyes that only a father could notice. Ethan felt powerless. He had built skyscrapers, signed global partnerships, and won awards, but at that moment, he couldn't build a bridge between his daughter and the children around her. Minutes passed, then half an hour. The candles on the cake flickered softly as the room buzzed with noise, yet Lily remained at her seat, alone. Ethan thought about going over and calling the children to gather around, but he hesitated. He didn't want to force them, and he didn't want Lily to feel like she was a burden. He wished desperately that someone, anyone, would step forward out of kindness, not obligation. Lily's small fingers tapped the side of her wheelchair. She tried to keep her face cheerful, but she couldn't hide her disappointment. She had imagined this birthday differently. She had pictured her friends sitting next to her, singing songs, telling jokes, and making her laugh until her cheeks hurt. Instead, she felt invisible, like a decoration in the very party that was meant for her. Ethan stayed close to her, unwilling to let her feel completely alone. He held her hand gently, squeezing it now and then as if to remind her, "I am here. You are not alone." But he knew that a father's love, no matter how deep, could not replace the companionship of children her own age. The scene looked almost symbolic, a bright, decorated hall filled with noise and color, and at the center, a little girl with a cake in front of her but no one beside her. It was like watching sunlight fall on a flower that remained closed, waiting for warmth to truly open. In that moment, Ethan realized something that struck him hard. Success, money, and status, all the things he had worked so hard for, meant nothing compared to the simple happiness of his daughter. What use was a big office or a fleet of cars when he couldn't give her what she needed most, friends who saw her for who she was, not for what she had lost? As the waiters prepared to light the birthday candles, Ethan forced himself to smile. He didn't want Lily to feel worse by seeing his sadness. He leaned closer and whispered, "Shall we blow out the candles together, my love?" Lily nodded, but her smile was faint. She knew her father was trying, and she loved him for it, but inside her little heart, she still wished someone her age would choose to sit beside her. And so, with the music playing softly in the background and the chatter of other children filling the room, Lily sat before her birthday cake alone, waiting for a moment that had not yet come. The birthday song had been sung, and the candles were blown out with Ethan leaning close to help his daughter. Everyone clapped politely, the way people do when tradition demands it. Waiters sliced the cake and passed it around the room, but even as sweet frosting was handed to each child, Lily sat with her small plate untouched. She smiled shyly whenever someone looked her way, but inside, her heart was quietly breaking. The room was filled with laughter and chatter, but most of it passed her by. Groups of children gathered at the far end of the hall, comparing gifts, teasing each other, and making plans for who would sit next to whom when the food was served. They weren't unkind, not deliberately. They were simply children, too young to understand how their silence and distance might wound someone. To them, Lily's wheelchair was a quiet barrier. They didn't know how to step across it, so they chose not to try. Ethan noticed every detail. Every whisper, every sideways glance, every empty chair around his daughter. He felt as if he were watching a play where his little girl had been cast in the role of the outsider. His chest tightened, and for the first time in years, he wished he could trade places with her just so she wouldn't have to feel the loneliness pressing against her like an invisible wall. He had worked so hard to make this day special. He had hired decorators who filled the room with balloons in Lily's favorite colors. He had arranged for a menu filled with her favorite foods: mini pizzas, fruit skewers, and chocolate brownies. He had even prepared a surprise magician who was waiting in the wings to perform tricks that would amaze the children. But none of those details mattered. A party without friends wasn't really a party at all. Lily glanced at the magician setting up in the corner. Normally, she loved magic shows. She had spent hours watching videos of card tricks and disappearing coins on her tablet. But tonight, even magic felt dull. What joy was there in clapping at a trick if you had no one beside you to share the wonder? She took a small bite of her cake and looked down at her plate. The sound of other children giggling reached her ears. It wasn't their laughter that hurt, it was the emptiness in her own chair beside her. She wished just one child would walk over, sit down, and say something simple like, "Hi, can I sit here?" But that moment never came. Ethan walked over and crouched beside her chair again. He brushed a strand of hair from her face and tried to cheer her up. "The magician will start soon," he said warmly. "Do you want to watch?" Lily nodded politely, but her voice was soft. "Yes, Daddy." Ethan's heart squeezed. He knew her well enough to recognize when her smile was real and when it was just a mask. Tonight, it was the latter. He wanted to gather her up in his arms and tell her none of it mattered, but he also knew it did matter to her, more than anything. Children didn't need big parties or fancy decorations. They needed company, laughter, and the simple comfort of friendship. As the magician began, a few children gathered closer to the stage. They clapped as he pulled scarves from his sleeve and made coins vanish. But Lily stayed in her chair, a little distance away, watching quietly. Ethan stayed by her side, clapping louder than anyone else, trying to make her feel included. Yet he couldn't ignore the hollow feeling in his chest. For Lily, the minutes dragged on. She told herself she was used to it, that she had learned how to be alone. But birthdays were supposed to be different. Birthdays were supposed to be filled with joy, with people singing your name and making you feel special. Instead, she felt invisible, like a guest at her own party. Ethan's mind wandered to memories of her earlier birthdays. He remembered her 5th birthday when she had danced around the living room in a princess costume, twirling until she was dizzy. He remembered her 6th birthday when she had played tag in the yard with a dozen friends, their laughter echoing through the evening air. Back then, her world had been wide open, full of possibilities. Now it felt as though her world had shrunk into a small circle: her father, her home, and her quiet thoughts. The sound of a balloon popping startled the room, followed by shrieks of laughter. A group of boys ran past, chasing each other with party hats, their faces glowing with mischief and fun. Lily watched them longingly, her fingers tightening on the edge of her plate. She wanted to join, to laugh, to run, but her chair kept her rooted in place. She felt like a bird watching others soar while her wings stayed folded. Ethan noticed her gaze and felt a wave of helplessness. He was a man who always had solutions, but tonight, there was no deal he could strike, no contract he could sign to give his daughter what she needed most. He placed a hand gently on her shoulder and whispered, "I'm proud of you, sweetheart. You're the bravest girl I know." Lily looked at him with a faint smile. She didn't want him to feel sad. "I'm okay, Daddy," she whispered back. But deep inside, she wasn't okay. She was holding in the ache of loneliness, trying not to let it spill out as tears. As the evening wore on, the chatter of the party continued. Parents complimented the decorations. Children ran to the magician for balloon animals. Waiters served food. But for Lily, the night felt slow, each minute stretching longer than the last. The saddest part for Ethan was knowing that Lily had been looking forward to this day for weeks. She had talked about her birthday almost every evening before bed, asking about the cake, the balloons, and what dress she should wear. She had smiled so brightly when she imagined her friends sitting with her. To see those dreams crumble in front of him now was almost unbearable. For a brief moment, Ethan considered ending the party early. He wanted to take Lily home, wrap her in a blanket, and watch her favorite movie together. Maybe in their own living room, she would feel less alone. But then he paused. Something inside him whispered that maybe, just maybe, the night wasn't over yet. Perhaps something could still happen to change the way the story ended. And so, Ethan stayed by his daughter's side, holding on to hope even as the room around them seemed blind to her loneliness. He believed in small miracles, and deep in his heart, he prayed that one would find them tonight. The magician finished his final trick, and the children clapped before rushing back to their own games. The room felt lively for everyone else, but for Ethan and Lily, the evening still carried a heavy silence. Lily's small hands rested quietly in her lap as she watched the other children play. The decorations sparkled above her, but she felt no sparkle inside her heart. Ethan stood behind her chair, smiling whenever someone looked their way, but his thoughts were tangled. He was wondering if this birthday would be remembered not for joy but for loneliness. That idea crushed him. A father could endure many things, but not the quiet sadness of his child. Just then, the door of the restaurant opened, and in walked a man and a boy. They were late, and it was clear they hadn't been part of the original guest list. The man wore a simple shirt and jeans, and the boy held his father's hand as they stepped inside. They paused near the entrance, looking around as if uncertain whether they belonged. Ethan noticed them instantly. He had never seen them before, but there was something about the way they stood close together, almost protective, that caught his attention. The boy looked to be around Lily's age, his eyes curious and bright. The father, though dressed plainly, carried himself with quiet dignity. The man whispered something to his son, and the boy nodded. Then, slowly, they walked toward the table where Lily sat alone with her father. The noise of the party faded into the background as they approached. When they reached the table, the man gave a gentle smile and spoke softly. "Hello," he said, his voice warm but careful. "We saw the celebration, and my son wanted to ask something." The boy looked directly at Lily, his eyes kind and sincere. He didn't glance at her wheelchair the way others had. He didn't hesitate. He simply smiled and asked, "Can we sit with you?" For a moment, the room seemed to freeze. Ethan blinked, almost unsure if he had heard correctly. Lily's lips parted in surprise, and then slowly, beautifully, a smile spread across her face, brighter than any candle flame. Her voice was soft but full of hope. "Yes, please." The boy pulled out a chair and sat right next to her, as though it was the most natural thing in the world. His father sat beside Ethan, giving a polite nod. "I hope we're not intruding," he said kindly. "Not at all," Ethan replied, still taken aback by the simple, unexpected kindness. "Thank you, for joining us." For the first time that evening, Lily's eyes lit up. She turned to the boy. "What's your name?" "Max," he replied proudly. "And this is my dad. We just came from the park. We didn't know there was a party here, but when I saw you, I thought maybe you'd like company." Lily's cheeks flushed with joy. No one had spoken to her like that in a long time. "I'm Lily," she said. "It's my birthday today." Max's eyes widened with excitement. "Really? Then happy birthday, Lily." He grinned. "You know what? Birthdays are the best. Did you make a wish?" Lily giggled, the sound so pure and unexpected that Ethan felt tears prick his eyes. "Yes," she said shyly. "What did you wish for?" Max asked eagerly. Lily shook her head, smiling. "I can't tell you. If I say it, it won't come true." Max laughed and nodded. "Okay, then I won't ask again. But I hope it comes true." The two children began talking as if they had known each other for years. They shared little stories about school, about cartoons they both liked, about the funniest things they had ever seen. Lily's face glowed with excitement, and for the first time all evening, she forgot about her wheelchair. She forgot about being different. She was simply a girl enjoying the company of a friend. Ethan watched the scene with quiet awe. He glanced at Max's father, who was smiling softly at the children. "Thank you," Ethan said, his voice filled with emotion. "You don't know what this means." The man shook his head. "No need to thank me. Kids should never have to sit alone on their birthday. My son saw her first. He just wanted to make sure she didn't feel lonely." Ethan studied the man closely. His clothes were simple, his hands slightly rough, as if he worked long hours. He was clearly not from Ethan's world of suits and boardrooms. Yet in that moment, Ethan felt that this man understood something far greater than business, the power of kindness. As the night went on, the atmosphere around Lily began to change. Other children noticed Max sitting with her, laughing and talking without hesitation. Slowly, a few of them grew curious. One girl came over and asked if she could join the conversation. Another boy followed, and soon, there were several children sitting around Lily's table. It was as though Max had opened a door no one else had dared to touch. By simply choosing to sit beside her, he had shown the others that it was easy, natural, and fun to be her friend. Lily's table, once the loneliest spot in the room, had suddenly become the liveliest. Ethan could hardly believe it. He leaned back in his chair, his heart swelling with relief and gratitude. All the decorations, the cake, the magician, none of it had managed to do what one simple question had achieved: "Can we sit with you?" Lily laughed so hard at one of Max's jokes that she nearly spilled her juice. Ethan hadn't heard that kind of laughter from her in so long. It was the kind of sound that healed wounds in a father's heart. He closed his eyes for a moment, silently thanking the universe for this unexpected gift. Max's father introduced himself as Daniel. He explained quietly that he was a single dad, working 2 jobs to support his son. Life hadn't been easy for them, but he had always taught Max that kindness was worth more than money. "If you see someone sitting alone," Daniel said, "you don't walk past them. You sit with them." "That's what I tell him." Ethan nodded slowly, humbled. He realized that while he had built skyscrapers and companies, Daniel had built something just as powerful in his son, a heart that noticed others. As the night drew on, the restaurant echoed with laughter and chatter, but this time, Lily was right at the center of it. Her eyes shone, her cheeks flushed, and her smile never faded. She wasn't invisible anymore. She wasn't alone. And Ethan, sitting quietly beside Daniel, thought to himself, this is the birthday memory she deserves. The restaurant that had once felt heavy with silence now sparkled with laughter. Lily's table, which had been the emptiest just an hour ago, was now full of life. The children who had once kept their distance were leaning in, talking, asking questions, and even sharing pieces of their food with her. The sound of her laughter echoed across the room like music, and Ethan felt as though a great weight had been lifted from his heart. He kept glancing at her, memorizing every smile, every sparkle in her eyes. This was what he had wanted all along, not a party that looked grand on the outside, but one that filled his daughter's heart with joy. And the reason it was happening wasn't because of balloons, cake, or magic tricks. It was because of one boy, Max, and the kindness he had shown without hesitation. Daniel, Max's father, sat quietly next to Ethan. He didn't try to make himself the center of attention. Instead, he watched the children the way a proud parent does, smiling softly whenever Max made Lily laugh. "You have a wonderful daughter," Daniel said after a while, his tone gentle and sincere. Ethan turned to him, his eyes still shining with emotion. "Thank you. She's my whole world." He paused, then added, "And you have a wonderful son. What he did tonight. I'll never forget it." Daniel shook his head. "He just followed his heart. I always tell him, if you see someone sitting alone, don't wait for someone else to act. Be the one who walks over." Ethan smiled, humbled. That's a lesson many adults could learn. The 2 men sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching their children. Lily was showing Max the bow in her hair, and Max was telling her about a dog he hoped to have one day. The way they leaned toward each other, completely lost in conversation, was enough to make both fathers smile. When the food was served, something beautiful happened. Instead of running off to different tables, most of the children stayed near Lily. They pulled their chairs closer, passing dishes around and making sure she got a share of everything. One girl even cut a slice of pizza and placed it gently on Lily's plate, saying, "Here, I saved the best piece for you." Lily's eyes shone as she whispered, "Thank you." Ethan watched her closely. For months, he had seen her try to hide her sadness. Tonight, he finally saw what she looked like when she felt included, when she felt like part of the group again. It was like watching the sun rise after a long, cold night. After dinner, the children started a game of charades. At first, Ethan worried Lily might be left out again, but Max quickly solved the problem. "We'll be a team," he announced, standing proudly beside her. "I'll act, and Lily can guess." The other children clapped at the idea, and soon the game began. Max jumped around pretending to be animals, superheroes, and even a robot. Lily laughed until her sides hurt, guessing most of them correctly. Each time she shouted the right answer, Max high-fived her with excitement. The room was filled with cheers, and for the first time since the accident, Lily didn't feel like the girl in the wheelchair. She felt like just another kid, part of the fun, part of the laughter. Ethan's eyes grew misty as he watched. He leaned slightly toward Daniel and said in a low voice, "You may think this is a small thing, but for her, this is everything." Daniel nodded, his expression soft. "I understand. Sometimes the smallest gestures change the biggest things." As the evening continued, something shifted not only for Lily but also for Ethan. For so long, he had lived in a world of business meetings, deadlines, and endless responsibilities. He thought he needed to provide his daughter with comfort through material things: big houses, private schools, expensive gifts. But tonight reminded him of a truth he had forgotten: what children need most isn't wealth or luxury, but genuine love, friendship, and moments of belonging. When it was time for the children to go home, many of them hugged Lily goodbye. "Thanks for inviting us," one boy said cheerfully. Another girl whispered, "Happy birthday, Lily. You're really fun." Each farewell was like a little stitch, slowly mending the fabric of her confidence that had been torn by loneliness. Finally, the room grew quieter. The balloons swayed gently in the air, and the waiters began clearing the tables. Lily leaned her head against her father's arm, her eyes still glowing with joy. "Daddy," she whispered, "this was the best birthday ever." Ethan swallowed hard, his throat tight with emotion. "I'm so glad you're happy, my love." She smiled dreamily. "I wished for a friend, and my wish came true." Those words pierced Ethan's heart with both pain and gratitude. Pain, because it reminded him how lonely she had felt. Gratitude, because her wish had been answered in the most unexpected way. Max walked over to Lily's chair before leaving. "Can we be friends forever?" he asked with a grin. Lily nodded eagerly. "Yes. Forever." The two shook hands, sealing their promise in the innocent way only children can. Daniel placed a hand on Max's shoulder. "We should go now," he said gently. Then he turned to Ethan. "Thank you for letting us be part of this. It meant a lot to my son too." "No," Ethan said firmly, shaking his head. "Thank you. You gave her the best gift of all." The two fathers exchanged a look of deep understanding, two men from different worlds, yet connected by the same desire, to see their children happy. As Daniel and Max walked out of the restaurant, Ethan felt something stir in his heart. It wasn't just gratitude. It was a reminder of what truly mattered in life. Not the endless pursuit of success, not the titles or the wealth, but these small, powerful moments of connection that could change everything. He looked down at Lily, who was still smiling to herself as though replaying every moment of the evening in her mind. She was no longer the girl who sat alone at her birthday cake. She was the girl who found a friend, who laughed until her cheeks hurt, and who ended the night with her heart full. Ethan knew that this birthday would stay with her forever, not because of the decorations or the food, but because of one boy who saw her when no one else did, and one simple question that changed everything: "Can we sit with you?" The night air was cool when Ethan and Lily finally left the restaurant. The street lights glowed softly, and the city hummed with its usual rhythm, but for Ethan everything felt different. He pushed Lily's wheelchair gently toward the car, his mind filled with the images of the evening. For weeks he had worried about this day, and for hours during the party his heart had ached, but now, as he looked at his daughter's glowing face, he realized the night had given him more than he ever expected. Lily was humming quietly to herself, still replaying every laugh and every conversation with Mac's daddy. She said suddenly, breaking the silence, "Did you see how funny Max was when he pretended to be a robot?" Ethan chuckled. "Yes, I saw. You guessed it right so quickly. You were amazing." She grinned proudly. "He said we can be best friends forever. Do you think he meant it?" Ethan looked down at her, his chest tightening with emotion. "Yes, sweetheart. I believe he meant every word." They reached the car, and Ethan carefully helped her into her seat. As he fastened her belt, he paused for a moment, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. "Lily," he said softly, "I want you to remember something. Tonight was special not because of the party, or the cake, or even the magician. It was special because you found someone who saw you for who you are. That's the real magic in life, finding people who care." Lily's eyes sparkled as she whispered, "I'll never forget this day, Daddy." Ethan kissed her forehead gently. "Neither will I." The drive home was quiet, but inside his heart, Ethan was reflecting deeply. For years, he had measured his worth by the size of his company, the numbers on his contracts, and the respect he commanded in the business world. But none of that mattered tonight. He realized that the true measure of his life was not in the empire he had built, but in the love and happiness of his daughter. When they reached home, Ethan carried Lily gently inside and tucked her into bed. She was still smiling, her eyelids heavy with sleep. "Good night, Daddy," she murmured drowsily. "Good night, my princess," he whispered, pulling the blanket snugly around her. He sat by her side until her breathing grew steady and soft. Even after she fell asleep, he stayed for a while, watching her peaceful face, silently thanking the universe for the gift of this night. Later, when he finally sat alone in his study, Ethan allowed himself to think about Daniel and Max. They had walked into the party as strangers, yet they had left behind something priceless. Daniel's humility and Max's kindness had opened a door in Lily's world that had been closed for too long. Ethan thought about how different their lives were. He was a wealthy CEO, used to making decisions in tall glass buildings. Daniel was a single father who worked multiple jobs just to provide for his son. But despite their differences, it was Daniel who had given him the most powerful lesson of all. He remembered Daniel's simple words, "Kids should never have to sit alone on their birthday." That truth echoed in Ethan's mind. It wasn't complicated, it wasn't polished like the speeches Ethan often gave in boardrooms, but it was more profound than anything he had heard in years. In the weeks that followed, the memory of that birthday lingered. Lily began talking about Max every day, about how he made her laugh, about the things he liked, about the games they could play together even if she couldn't run. Her loneliness began to fade, replaced by the warmth of a new friendship. And Ethan noticed something even greater. Lily's confidence began to grow again. She started speaking up more in school, smiling more at neighbors, and even asking her father if she could try new hobbies. All because one boy had sat down beside her when she needed it most. Ethan often found himself replaying that moment in his mind, the moment Daniel and Max walked up to the table, and Max asked, "Can we sit with you?" It was such a small question, so ordinary, and yet it had changed everything. He began to wonder how many people in the world were sitting alone, waiting for someone to notice them. How many were silently wishing for a friend, for someone to say those exact words. And how often did people, busy with their own lives, walk past without seeing? Ethan knew he could never look at life the same way again. In his business world, he had been trained to see numbers, profits, and losses. But now, he had learned to see something greater, the invisible weight people carried in their hearts. And he promised himself that he would never ignore it again. One evening, about a month after the party, Ethan invited Daniel and Max to their home for dinner. He wanted Lily and Max to continue their friendship, but he also wanted to know Daniel better. They shared a meal together, simple but warm, and Ethan found himself enjoying the easy conversation. Daniel talked about his struggles, about raising Max alone, about working long hours. Ethan listened with respect, realizing how strong Daniel had to be. At one point, Ethan said quietly, "You know, Daniel, I've spent years surrounded by people with wealth and influence, but tonight I feel richer than ever because of your son's kindness." Daniel smiled humbly. "Sometimes kindness is all we really have to give. But I've learned it's usually enough." Those words stayed with Ethan long after dinner ended. As time passed, the bond between their families grew. Max and Lily became inseparable friends, writing little notes to each other, sharing stories, and spending afternoons together. Daniel and Ethan, though different in many ways, found common ground as fathers. Ethan realized that meeting Daniel and Max had been more than coincidence. It was as if life had stepped in to remind him of what truly mattered. On quiet nights, when Ethan thought back on everything, he felt grateful not just for the joy that had returned to his daughter's life, but for the lesson that had returned to his own. He had learned that true success wasn't measured in boardrooms or bank accounts. True success was measured in the way you touched lives, in the kindness you gave, and in the love you shared. The story of Lily's birthday became more than just a family memory. It became a reminder, a symbol of how a single act of kindness can change a lonely moment into a lifetime of hope. And for Lily, that birthday was not remembered as the night she sat alone in front of her cake. It was remembered as the night she found a friend, the night her laughter returned, and the night she discovered that wishes really do come true. For Ethan, it was the night he realized that sometimes, the greatest miracles don't come from money, power, or planning. Sometimes they come from something much simpler, a single question, asked at just the right moment, by someone who cares. "Can we sit with you?" Those words would echo in his heart forever.